I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there have been so many different versions of Zorro over the years. In America alone, we've had 11 feature films and a TV series based on the Fox. But for the sake of this comparison, I'm only going to talk about the two most influential Zorro movies, and really the only ones that matter. Revenge of the Remakes. Now, when I say there's only two that matter, that's not entirely true. I have to give credit to the original 1920 version starring Douglas Fairbanks. And if you know anything about Douglas Fairbanks, he established not just the character of Zorro, but the swashbuckling genre as a whole. From his pirate movies to his Robin Hood adaptation to Zorro, he was the guy you called to do fantastic stunts and swordplay. I'm just gonna come on and say it. Watching these two movies again, I am a much bigger Zorro fan than I have any right to be. I love both of these movies so much. They make me so happy. They have such a sense of fun and adventure and action that you just can't help but have a great time. Zorro is what you would get if you threw Batman and Robin Hood into a pot and sprinkled some Spanish seasoning just for good measure. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What are the stories of these movies? Well, they're similar in a lot of ways, but also different in just as many ways. So the 1940 Mark of Zorro is your big budget remake of what Douglas Fairbanks did in the 20s. And because of that, the story is pretty straightforward. So you have Diego Vega, aka Zorro, who spent most of his adult life in Spain until he returned to California to find that his father is no longer in control of the territory and that he's given it up to Don Luis Quintero, who is just the worst ruler ever. He's taxing the people, he's oppressing them, he's doing it for his own personal gain, but Zorro's not going to stand for that. So he dons the mask and horse and hat and he goes out and he fights for truth and justice and the people of California. And he falls in love along the way. So that's a pretty simple story, not a whole lot of crazy plot twists or subplots or anything, and it does lend itself to a lot of cool Zorro action scenes and conflicts between the main characters. On the other hand, the 1998 Mask of Zorro is much more complicated. This story actually opens up with a prologue where you see Diego Vega complete his last night as Zorro. The Dons have left California, the people are free, and he plans on retiring. That is until his arch nemesis, Don Rafael Montero, tracks Zorro to his house. A fight breaks out, Zorro's wife dies, and Zorro is sent away to a prison for 20 years while Rafael raises his daughter Elena as his own. Cut to 20 years later and you have the Murrieta brothers, who are basically doing what Zorro did but on a much lower scale and keep a much lower profile than Zorro ever did. But then one of the brothers, Joaquin Murrieta, who actually was a legendary character in his own right. Do your own research. There are some very interesting parallels between Joaquin and Zorro and El Dorado, and there's a lot of connections that this movie alludes to, but for the sake of simplicity, they don't go that far into. But nevertheless, it is an interesting read. But anyway, in this version, Joaquin dies and Alejandro, his brother, vows revenge against his brother's killer. So at this point, we've got two different stories going on. We've got Zorro, who's out for revenge against Rafael, and we've got Alejandro, who's out for revenge against Captain Love. Oh, and Captain Love works for Rafael, so I see an opportunity. And Zorro sees it too. He takes it upon himself to train Alejandro to be his successor, to be the next Zorro, because frankly, he's just too old. So if you haven't figured it out already, this version of Zorro is in some ways a sequel to the 1940 version, but at the same time a reboot and origin story for this new young version of Zorro. And the rest of the movie plays out like your typical Zorro origin story. Zorro trains up, he has a couple opportunities to prove himself, he makes some missteps, he makes some progress, and in the end both Zorros get to face off against their adversaries and beat them. So while the original is a simpler and cleaner and more straightforward story, I do respect this version of Zorro for not just being another Zorro movie, while still keeping true to the character and style of Zorro, and even paying homage to the versions that have come before. But let's really compare these different takes on Zorro, because there are some very interesting differences. And I'm going to start with Anthony Hopkins, the old Zorro from the 98 film, because he's by far the least interesting of all of them. He plays it really well, and I couldn't think of a better actor to put in this role. It's just that he's not given a whole lot of screen time in the costume, and he plays more of a mentor figure, but even so, Hopkins nails all the things that a good Zorro needs to nail. He's got the skill with the sword, he's got the charm and grace to fit in with high society, and he's really got a heart for the people of California. He plays this much more like a public service and an obligation than something that he wanted to do or even enjoyed. Even though he did clearly enjoy it, he had a smile on his face the whole time he was running around on horseback. So yeah, pretty good Zorro, even though he didn't get a lot of opportunities to show it. Now, staying within the same movie, Antonio Banderas' Zorro is the complete opposite. at least initially. Now remember, this is an origin story for him, so Antonio Banderas has by far the most character growth of any of the Zorros. And Banderas plays it as a flawed action hero. He's very passionate, he is on a single-minded quest to get revenge for his brother. But the thing is, he lacks the charm and grace that will allow him to pass for a gentleman to get close to his target. And because of that, you get a lot more of the rebellious side of Zorro in this movie. He has a lot of fun. He'll tease the guards, he'll embarrass them, he'll do these fantastic stunts just because he can and because it's fun. But as his arc continues, not only is his skill with the sword improving, but he also learns how to effectively wear the mask of Alejandro and fit in with high society. And that's the thing, if you fit in with the snooty upper class of 1800s California, nobody's gonna suspect you of being Zorro. And he learns those lessons well. But as great of a job as Antonio Banderas does with his depiction and reinterpretation of Zorro, I gotta give it to Tyrone Power in 1940. His take on Zorro is perfect. It is the fully realized version of what Anthony Hopkins' character teased at the beginning of the movie. He has the sword fighting skills. He has multiple opportunities to prove that. He has the sense of fun and irreverence that Antonio Banderas really captured in Zorro, but he also has a quiet dignity about him. That he can have fun and embarrass and mess with the Californian soldiers, but at the same time, he knows who he is and he's confident in that. And that's something that Antonio Banderas, by nature of it being an origin story, doesn't have for the majority of the runtime. But on top of that, his best quality is when he's not in the mask. The Mark of Zorro spends more time than you would expect with Zorro not wearing a mask. And you might think that that would get boring, but it really doesn't, because Tyrone Power does such a great job at playing the fop. He wears that mask so well that not only are his family and friends disappointed in him, that he cares more about the latest fashion trends than the injustices in the world, but as the audience, you're just blown away by how insufferable this 17th century hipster is. But it just makes it all the more hilarious and entertaining because you know that as soon as he puts on the mask and sword, that persona washes away completely. And I give so much credit to Tyrone Power. He walks that line of the fop and the rogue so well that when he has his big climactic duel towards the end, he's not even in costume. He's not even in his Zorro costume, but the persona of Diego Vega has completely disappeared, and you're watching a fully realized Zorro without a mask fighting Basil Rathbone. But what would Zorro be if he didn't have a beautiful woman to fall in love with? And both of these movies provide that. So in the 40 version, Linda Darnell plays Lolita Quintero, the niece of Don Luis Quintero, who is the corrupt politician that Zorro needs to kick out. But she does a really good job in this movie too. She is not some damsel in distress that Zorro needs to go rescue. In fact, she never gets captured in this. Zorro is always in much more danger and falls into more traps than she ever did. But not only that, but her character is given a surprising amount of depth for the time period. For instance, when Zorro is having dinner with the family and he's in full fop mode, she is completely turned off by him. She thinks he's so stupid and so immature that she not only clearly has no interest, but she straight out sasses and sarcastically insults him. And it's not until she realizes that he is Zorro and that it was all a facade, that's when their relationship really starts to pick up. But all this is great, but none of it holds a candle to Catherine Zeta-Jones in The Mask of Zorro. Not only is she Catherine Zeta-Jones, but she has just as much, if not more, wit and independence than Linda Darnell. Like her predecessor, she is completely turned off by Zorro's facade. She has no interest in him whatsoever. And it's not until she starts to see beneath the surface, granted Zorro never officially reveals himself for like he did in the 40 version, she kind of starts to piece things together for herself through the inconsistencies with how Alejandro acts around her father and when they're alone, which is a true testament to her character's intelligence. But not only is she smart and so attractive, but she is an amazing fighter. She says that she had fencing instruction since she was 4, and it shows. There's a scene in this movie that I don't think exists in any other swashbuckling movies where the lead and the love interest cross swords, and the love interest wins. I know a lot of you may have forgotten because she does end the fight topless, but if we're just going by the section of the fight that is the sword fight, she beats and disarms him pretty easily. And it's not until Zorro starts improvising and using the environment to his advantage that he does end up getting the upper hand in the end. But Zeta-Jones as Elena is the best swordsman in this movie, and that can't be overstated. But what would a good Zorro movie be without memorable villains? And these movies also supply those. In the original, you had Don Luis, who was the corrupt head of California, but really the memorable villain in this movie is Basil Rathbone as Captain Esteban. Now, Basil Rathbone is one of those actors that is just legendary. He is so good at sword fighting on screen that it's kind of a shame that he's been typecast as these villains that always lose the match. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't think Basil Rathbone has ever won a sword fight on screen. He always loses. And I'm sure in real life he is the better swordsman than Errol Flynn or Tyrone Power or any of the other swashbucklers that he's gone up against. And Basil Rathbone in this role takes full advantage, and he is just having a ball with it. He spends practically the entire movie with a naked sword in his hand, waving it around like a child. And I don't know if this was something written into the script or if it was just something that Basil Rathbone did so often on set that the director was just like, yeah, let's just make it a nervous habit that the character has. It'll be fun. And boy, is it fun. And it surprisingly works to the movie's advantage. It makes Esteban much more than just your average captain of the guard. Rathbone did a lot to make his character stand out. Now on the 98 side, you have Stuart Wilson, who plays Captain Love, who unfortunately is no Basil Rathbone. He is the captain of the guard, and he plays it like the captain of the guard. Except for one really weird, out of place, bizarre scene where he has Zorro's brother's head in a water jar. What the hell is that? I mean, I know he's doing it to get Zorro to reveal himself and slip up and make him emotional, but dude, that's nasty. And it's bizarre considering how bland and ordinary his performance had been so far. And it continues to be after that scene. It's very strange. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but it goes without saying that in both films, the action is insane. The original relies a lot more on traditional sword fighting and duels, and it does it so well. It is some of the best swordplay I've ever seen in a movie. And that's because they use a lot of long, wide takes where you just have the two characters going at it, where you can see the speed and physicality of the duel take place in real time. But it would be unfair for me not to bring up how the 98 version does more or less the same thing, but ups it with more modern special effects. There's a lot of explosions. There's a more ambitious staging of a lot of the action scenes. There's a really fantastic horseback chase about halfway through the movie, and the stunts that they're able to pull off with very minimal CGI is incredible. And the sword fighting is pretty good too. It's not as clean and impressive as the 1940 version, but they do keep it exciting, and the characters utilize the environments a lot more in their duels. And before I wrap up, there is one more thing worth noting about these movies and Zorro as a whole, and that's its relationship to Batman. Zorro has a very interesting history with Batman. In the original comics, when Batman's parents were gunned down in the alley, they were leaving the theater right after seeing Zorro, the Douglas Fairbanks version, since that was the only version out at the time. But then as the years have progressed and Batman's birth date has also progressed, different versions of Zorro, including the Tyrone Power version, has served as the film that the Waynes saw right before they died. And because Bruce Wayne's mind connects the events of Zorro with the events of his parents' killing, it would make sense for him to adopt a lot of the tropes and tactics that Zorro used. Dressing in all black, having a black mode of transportation, wearing a mask, running along the rooftops, and serving out vigilante justice. There are some pretty stark similarities. And to that point, in the 1998 version, you can see that the writers and directors not only took inspiration from the Zorro movies that came before, but also from the Batman series of films that were popular at the time. And that about wraps up my thoughts on the Zorro movies. I love both of these movies so much. I watched both versions a lot as a kid, and every time I pop these movies in, I'm instantly transported back in time to when I was a kid and I had sword fights in the backyard. There's just such a pure sense of fun and excitement and adventure that comes with these movies. Now I turn it to you guys. Which Zorro movie do you like better, the 1940 version or the 1998 version? Heck, I'll even throw in the Douglas Fairbanks version for you old school cinephiles out there. But let me know what you think, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.